Welcome to the Mend Podcast, the fly fishing podcast. We don't sponsor, we don't advertise, we don't sell out. It's just good fishing content. The only thing you ask is when you need something to go fly fishing, shop at Red's. That's all we ask. It's a great place to shop anyways. Got a whole dedicated shipping crew. We ship orders in about 2.5 hours typically, about how long it takes to get orders out. Usually they're out within 30 minutes when you order them. So anyway, if you haven't shopped online with us, do it. This is Joe Roeder. I'm going to be solo podcasting with you today, and I'm going to do a little different format. I realize this isn't a video podcast, but I'm actually going to be working on some tackle and digging around in my kit bag, just talking fishing with you while I do some organization. I thought that'd be kind of a genuine, raw way to share with you some tips. I guided yesterday, and then I'm going to be guiding tomorrow again. And we're in kind of a transition season where things are changing pretty fast every day with the water in the fall. We're at literally historic low flows on the Yakima River right now. So low and clear. And that's not uncommon at the end of September for most trout streams. It's the low point of the year. For us right now, we're still having fairly warm weather. So hatches are actually at their low point of the year as well. If you don't follow us on YouTube, I would strongly suggest go do that. Check out the video I just posted today about October caddis pupa. Our October caddis hatch is just about to start, and that's going to be kind of one of the mainstays of today's podcast, is talking about the October caddis hatch as well. So I think I'll just run through kind of yesterday's trip while I dig around in my tackle here. And one major tip, at least I think it's a major tip, as I'm sorting out some tippet and stuff here, is using lighter tippets to actually check the bite. And what I mean by that is this time of year, I'll do a lot of experimenting with different flies. I mean, the fish have had a whole summer's education, so they're pretty up to speed on what's what as far as bugs go. And so I'll change small nymphs really a lot until I find something that really is having, a more significant impact on the bite rate. And I'll test a new nymph oftentimes on the dreaded 6X. And I don't like to fish 6X all the time when I'm guiding. Certainly guiding, I say this over and over on the podcast, guiding is not fishing. Guiding, you have people for a handful of hours. You're trying to deliver a good adventure for them, help them. Naturally, getting into some fish would be really, really great and provide a balance of teaching versus just catching some trout. So it's not the same as fishing. But when it comes to guiding, a lot of times I'll test a fly on lighter tippet than I might normally fish just to check the fly's effectiveness. So yesterday when I was experimenting with a lot of bugs, I would run them initially on 6X. And if I started to get even just a handful of good takedowns and strikes, the fish are they're pretty finicky right now. They're taste testing a lot of stuff. They'll hit it and spit it pretty fast. And so I'll run 6X and test that bite, hook a couple of fish. Maybe we break one off. We did break off a great big one yesterday in the afternoon doing just that. But it gives me a really quick read on whether that fly change was going to promote, better fishing. So maybe you're normally a 4X person and you're like, hey, I need to see if this bug works. Run it on 5. Just run a few drifts, check it out a little bit, run it on 5X, see if that gets a few more strikes, hooks up a few more fish. If you bust a fly off, either a branch, the bottom, a trout, whatever, you can always beef it back up. But that gives you a much quicker read on whether the fly is effective. So I try to take all variabilities out of the presentation by running 6X, and then I can always ramp it up. And sometimes if the angler's got the right rod, if they're fishing a long, light rod, like a 3 or 4 weight, the tippet size is not much of an issue. It's a small hook most of the time anyways. I think the most of my nymphs are going to be 16s to 20s right now this time of year, with the exception of the great October caddis pupa, which is a lunker. I fish that in 8 a lot. And I'll need to run minimum of 5 on that, if not 4X. So I thought that was a really good tip. The other one was, we're still having hot weather, and the bite yesterday, we got out and started fishing about 9:30, which is like normally great this time of year. One thing that's really nice about the fall is the bite typically peaks in kind of the midday hours. But man, yesterday by 1 o'clock, with this warm September weather we're still having, kind of an Indian summer, the bite just died after 1 o'clock. And that's when I started to do a lot of experimenting with different bugs and different depths. And that's when I started to run that 6. But my lead setup yesterday, I always share all the information I got with you, with listeners. I don't care whether if I see in the same stretch fishing exactly what I told you to do, wonderful. I just hope you catch a few fish. So I always share everything. So my setup yesterday was pretty straightforward. I share it on the podcast all the time, but I ran somewhat of a New Zealand style indicator, just a couple strands of yarn near the end of a 7.5-foot 4X tapered leader, and then a couple feet down a 5X fluorocarbon to a single nymph. And I ran a Frenchie, a size 16 Frenchie, all morning long. Ran both anglers guiding on the same rig, and it was lights out. I mean, we had several doubles, really good fishing. I thought I was God's gift to guiding. And then, man, after lunch, it just got really tough. And it's, again, guiding's not fishing, but you start to make too many changes. And I did. I chased my tail for quite a while, just trying to find, like, what have the fish moved on to? What fly at this time of day with this lighting will the fish be responsive to? And I think about 1 in every 7 fly changes actually yields a positive result. So, boy, I went through 7 fairly quick, just kind of chasing that morning bite to see if we could replicate it. And the fact was, the fishing just slowed down. We ended up throwing streamers, we ended up throwing dries just to mix things up, and then eventually went back to nymphing and ran a little bit deeper. And I went to a 2-fly rig with 1 tungsten jig head nymph and then 1 really itty bitty. And we hooked a great big trout in the last hole. And I started to focus exclusively on the deeper spots. In the morning, we were doing really well on the shallow transition water and doing great on the really, really kind of shallowish ledges. And I think just throughout the day, those fish just retreated down into water that made it much harder to get. So I think there was an adjustment that was worth noting there is the fish physically moved kind of their depth and location throughout the day. And so I think that was a kind of a good takeaway. We did not catch any fish on streamers during, we fished them right kind of during the middle of the day just to see if we could shake it up and make a little action happening. But that did not, we didn't move any fish on dries either. So the evening right now, in the fall, if you're a dedicated dry fly angler, you really want to make sure that you're out after that sun kind of gets behind either the canyon walls or the tree line or wherever it is you're fishing, and really make sure that you set some time aside for that. So, yeah, a couple of takeaways from yesterday. Probably should have got out a little bit earlier. Can't always predict the future, but would have been better to get out a little bit earlier in the morning. Tomorrow, I'm going to get just a little bit earlier start and see if we can't capture more of that morning bite, because it was exceptional in the morning time frame yesterday. So experimented with a lot of different stuff. I'm rearranging some flies for tomorrow's trip, and as we get into the fall, again, the fish have had a whole summer's education, and I'm going to make some small adjustments to my fly selection. I went down to the river and yanked some October caddis pupa out of the river, and there was tons of big October caddis pupa all along the shore. And I'm definitely going to start with the smaller size of the tungsten jighead mop in the orange color tomorrow. It's a tungsten jighead mop fly by Solitude. Excuse me. If I were personally fishing, I would fish it probably exclusively on a tight line nymphing rig. I like to feel the fish, and then if you've seen this bug move, which you can see in that YouTube video or an Instagram video that I put up, you'll see why being able to add a little bit of action or agitation to it really helps, instead of just a slack dead drift. But being able to have that thing tap the rocks, and then the energy that's loaded in the fine tip of a Euro nymphing or tight line nymphing rod, be able to pop that fly, man, there's just nothing like it. It's incredibly effective. One thing about like the kind of guiding we do, like we do kind of your traditional Montana style drift boat guiding, is we don't meet a lot of anglers that can tightline nymph. I mean, there's such a learning curve to it that you have to embrace the suck a little bit It's very humbling when you start out tightline nymphing. So we end up, when we run nymphs, we're going to run them as a hopper dropper rig, or we're going to run them as an indie rig. And I prefer New Zealand style indie versus the hopper dropper. There's some qualities about it that I really like. But I got some October caddis here in my hands right now, some pupa that I'm going to run definitely in the morning when the fish are a little bit more aggressive. And those October caddis pupa are nocturnal migrators as well. So I'm going to try to take advantage of that in the morning. And then as the fish get a little bit more selective midday, I'm going to make an adjustment that I learned about yesterday, and then really just skip a lot of the shallowy, kind of those cool little pockets and shallow edges and stuff that the fish don't mind holding it in low light. But it was apparent that the fish moved in and slid into the deep tanks for safety during the course of the day. So that'll be another adjustment that I'll make. And then we'll have it in stock and available for purchase probably in a few days, probably by the time you listen and digest this podcast. But the strike indicator company that makes the New Zealand strike indicator tool, which I've kind of gone away from using that tool and setting them up with the tubing. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, just go look up New Zealand strike indicator. And we have some good videos on our website, but like if you go to their website, you're going to really see like some great examples. I mean, that's all they do. They put a lot of time into that media. But for less experienced anglers, there's a real learning curve to fishing yarn as well. And so like when you're guiding, you have a few hours with this person. The trip might be 8 hours, but you only have about 2 to 3 maybe that you can really focus on coaching and teaching, because you really need to let the folks fish and kind of learn through reps. And I was finding that the way I rigged my yarn up for the guests yesterday was just too sensitive. It was too light, and that lightweight, delicate nature is very good for an advanced angler. But I was finding that the anglers I was with, it was just a little bit too light for them. And the way the New Zealand indicator rigs up with that little piece of surgical tubing is very similar to a Dorsey indicator system, or even like a Loon tip topper, which I think is probably the best like pre-bought yarn indicator. It was just moving too much when they were mending. It was a little bit too delicate and a little bit too sensitive and too light. But tomorrow, I'm actually going to start to run that New Zealand strike indicator tool rig again. And that's going to help anchor that indicator in a little bit, just so that when their mends do bump the indicator's anchored in a little bit. That little plastic tubing or surgical tubing. It's not surgical tubing. I'm looking at some right now. It's just like little plastic tubing. It's like a little nipple that sits down in the water, and it holds just a little bit better position in the water for mending. I normally take strands of that synthetic indicator yarn from the strike indicator company, and I tie it in, but I'm actually going to go back to the traditional rig, and it'll be a nice A/B test just to run it. Having ran, something similar yesterday, I'll run it back and I'll rig it up different tomorrow. And I'm going to re-rig or pre-rig rods for folks. It's funny, I'm going through my flies right now, a bunch of empty cups in the bottom of my kit bag. And it's crazy how much the fly selection in the past like 2 to 3 weeks has changed. I'm looking at these big, giant, flashy Perdigon nymphs, like big 14s. And that's what we were just fishing so recently. And man, I don't think those fish would touch that right now. And then stonefly nymphs are way less active in the fall. Stonefly nymphs live year round. I'm just sorting flies, so I'm going to just take a little aside here and talk about the flies I'm kind of reorganizing as I clean up. But stonefly nymphs live in the water 2 to 4 years, so they're in here all the time. But I'll tell you, I went and flipped rocks today to pick up a few of the October caddis pupa for that little video I wanted to make. And man, those nymphs are buried under the rocks. Like there is no nymph. No self-respecting nymph is up on top of the rock where trout could kind of come by and pick it off, man. It's hilarious. So stonefly nymphs kind of take a back seat to probably some other more, what I would describe as more creative nymph selections. And that's going to be, a little, I don't know the darn name of it, but it's a little bright green caddis larva with a black head. And I tie some very similar. I've tied them for years, but I grab these ones out of the shop, and they're basically just a black bead with a little black dubbing and then a green ribbed body in a bright green color. But that's an American Granum's caddis. It's a little case caddis, and it's chartreuse or bright green inside. And we could not tap the bottom without several of those little micro case caddis coming up on our hooks. I mean, if you've seen some of the videos of the Mother's Day caddis hatch here, that's the larva that we're imitating. And there's more of those in the river, in my opinion, based on my best estimate, than every other insect in the river combined. And just the fact that we were dragging up those tiny little case caddis again and again and again really told me, like, hey, everything else is really sucked up under the rocks. Anything that can really move and crawl is really hidden in there. And so I'm going to run some of those little tiny bright green case caddis. They're look like 18s to me. I just picked them out visually. And then some really, really sparse Baetis nymphs, and then some really, really little olive zebra midge as well. So I'm going to run that in tandem with that little October caddis mop fly, and run a 2-fly rig under a pretty good sized yarn indicator tomorrow. Rod wise, I don't know if the guests are going to bring rods, but I want to be ready to go. So I'm going to rig up a couple in advance, and I've got a couple of 10-foot 4-weights that I want to rig up. I really, really like a 10-foot 4-weight for yarn fishing and yarn indicator fishing. They just mend so good. They're delicate and light enough to keep fish pinned, even on those small hooks, and protect light tippet, but they'll still get it done if we need to throw some tough roll casts and things like that with a multi-fly rig. So the other thing about that rod, I mentioned this on other podcasts, I just think, like, for wade fishermen that are real serious, fishing a fair amount, like having a rod that can act as a crossover rod where you could, do some dry fly fishing, hopper dropper fishing, run little indicators and yarn, and then midday or starting in the morning, it doesn't matter the order, I suppose, but is be able to tight line fish on that very rod. And I think that is of huge value to what I would describe as the kind of the somewhat more dedicated do-it-yourself wade fisherman. And I don't mean to exclude anybody in that, but if you just fish a few days a year, a couple days a year, heck, just run whatever you got. It doesn't really even matter what it is at that point. Just get out there and enjoy yourself and enjoy fishing. So run your 9-foot 5-weight, 6-weight. It doesn't matter to me. But if you're fishing a lot, I can't not mention again and again that having some type of crossover rod would be really important. Yeah, tippet wise, so on my lanyard right now that I'm looking at, tippet that I would theoretically use tomorrow, I've got 4, 5, and 6X fluorocarbon. It runs just on my lanyard. I run a piece of parachute cord to a set of scissor clamps. I like nippers, but I seem to wear them out so fast that the scissor clamps for me, I can cut line, I can pinch barbs and do all of that really, really efficiently and effectively. So I just run one tool for all of my cutting as well. Oh, a tool that I added I've got 2 of them in here. Ah, that's cool. I didn't even know I had one. Now I've got a duplicate. I can give one to a friend. Is a catch and release tool. Yesterday morning before it went flat, we were catching so many fish that I knew we were going to have a good morning. So I got a catch and release tool. And if you've not seen these things, catch and release tools are awesome. So they're just a little release tool. And I believe how we handle fish is the biggest determining factor in the future of our fisheries. I think there's lots of government municipalities. I mean, God, you can't hardly take a pee near the river without a permit if you're doing construction. So there's a lot of government agencies working really hard to keep the water clear, clean, and cold. We could always do more. These are precious rivers. Don't think I'm naive to the fact there's bad stuff probably trickling in there right now, but just handling the fish, that's the angler's responsibility. Handling the fish with as light a touch as we possibly can, in my opinion, is really critical. And that catch and release tool, man, just for quick, efficient releases and keeping those fish wet and back in the water, swimming and healthy and thriving after release, not just surviving. That's not enough. It's not enough to just let a fish go live. That's ridiculous. That fish should explode out of the net. It should run off immediately. Trout, I don't believe, should ever have to be revived. I feel like a trout, if you have to revive it, or it's required that you revive it, you pretty much killed it. So after 25 years of guiding, I have pretty strong opinions on how we don't handle fish. They're not my fish. They're not your fish, they're everybody's. So you're just borrowing them for a minute. Catch and release tool for small nymph season is really, really critical as well. So, okay, got my tippet set up. The other thing I've got here, and I'll probably try to take a little break at lunch and fish myself for about 10 or 15 minutes while the guests are eating and chit-chatting. I'll give them a little space to just hang out, and it's going to be a multi-boat trip. I'm guiding with Steve Joyce tomorrow. It's always a blast. But yeah, I'll try to fish for a few minutes, and I got some really cool, I can't show them to you, but I'm going to talk about them, but I got some really cool prototype crayfish. The Joe's Mini Craw has been the long-time undefeated champion of miniature crayfish for tight line nymphing. But I think I've got something that may best it, knock it off its pedestal. My friend Patrick Kilby tied these. They're really, really awesome. So I'm going to test these. He was on the podcast recently. He's a flight department manager for Rio Products. And yeah, he tied me up some of these crayfish. So I can't show them, but I'll talk about them. I might get in trouble from Patrick and get cut off, but oh well. That'll be a bummer, but I'm really excited, so I can't help but mention it. So, okay. Other little critical tackle items that I'm just inventorying. I really like to use tippet rings on my ultralight nymph rigs. That way, if I bust off some 5 or 6X, I can tie right to a tippet ring, which I like to position right under my indicator. And then, so I'm inventorying my tippet rings. It looks like I got a half dozen of those. They're good to go for tomorrow. And then an indicator comb, if you're going to run yarn, I think I just call it essential. They're a few bucks, for crying out loud, people. Just get a comb if you're going to run yarn. Back to yarn again, beat this to death on the podcast in the past. And again and again and again, we will say guiding is not fishing. The way we guide is not necessarily the way we would recommend somebody wade fish the river. When we're cruising in a boat and going, several miles, we do things a little differently. But when we talk about yarn, it is an advantage when you're fishing on foot. And the thing about yarn is there's a bit of a learning curve to it. A lot of people do it just enough to hate it. And then they give up, and then they go back to their Oros or their thingamabobber, which certainly have their place for, heavy flies and, really rugged currents and things. But right now in the fall, we need something ultra sensitive. And I think on a recent podcast, Tom Larimer mentioned this, and it was super profound for me. If you haven't listened to the most recent Tom Larimer podcast, he was talking about his theory that when the fish pulls against a yarn indicator, there's so little resistance that the fish will actually not spit the fly out as fast. And I was watching yesterday morning, and because we ended up switching to a thingamabobber much later in the day, just for ease of operation, and we were fishing a little heavier and a little deeper just in the holes. Not my favorite style of nymphing, just running the slots. I like the edgy water. I like the shallower, kind of more interesting water than just running flies through the big, deep pits. But I was watching, and that yarn was just so hypersensitive. It was the hook, the takedown to hookup ratio on yarn was undoubtedly higher, which I thought was exactly in line, with my longtime beliefs, and then what Tom was saying about the fish just hanging on to a little longer, especially in the fall. Those fish just giving you just another moment and allowing you to react and catch up. So, yeah, we're going to go back to, I got this New Zealand Strike Indicator tool kit here. I'm just opening the package. I'm a big fan of the synthetic yarns. I think that the wool that originally these came with, it works okay. It's kind of classy because it is a New Zealand indicator rig, so you probably should fish wool, but I think the synthetic stuff is better. So I'm actually looking at the tool right now. It's been a while since I've used it, and it looks like it's preloaded with a few of these little tubing guys. And I'm actually going to preload a few more on there and go back to that. Now, the thing about the New Zealand Strike Indicator tool kit, or the New Zealand Strike Indicator tool, is that it is adjustable. The tubing I'm describing, and if you're totally unfamiliar with this, just listen to the podcast and then go watch a video about it. But the tubing actually provides friction on your tippet, and you can actually just slide the indicator up and down, which I typically don't do. But in these current flows, like going from, we normally guide at pretty high flows, and the fish are very comfortable feeding up in the water column. It feels to me like yesterday that those fish needed that fly near the bottom. And so I'm going to be adjusting my indicator depth a little bit more actively than I normally do. Normally, I just adjust the tippet length. But tomorrow, we're going to get them, man. So I'm preloading this tool because I will probably end up making a couple of different indicators per rig because the yarn, eventually it just kind of wears thin and you lose a little bit of the material and then you got to rebuild it. But yeah, the tool is great. So I've got that toolkit and I'm going to fix that to my lanyard so that I'm able to pretty much instantaneously repair. And I've got a little bag. I got like a little stash pocket in my tackle bag here that I keep all my yarn indicator materials in. And it works really well. And that way I can reach into that and I can get my tubing, I can get my yarn or whatever. I know right where it is. I don't have to go through 8 different pockets, but I keep my indicator kit kind of all in one nice, neat, tidy spot. So I keep various colors of yarn. My preference is white for stealth, but I'll run orange or green or whatever, depending on the lighting conditions. If it's real flat light, you probably hear all this traffic. There's drift boats pulling by me. I'm out here in the parking lot, sweating, working on my tackle. But yeah, depending on the light, you can run bright green and, I can switch to white. White would be my preference just because I think it's a little bit stealthier. Anything to kind of help disguise our approach, I think is really, really good. And then, the other thing I'll do is I'll pre-cut some of the indicator strands. And that way I've got the strands of yarn kind of ready to go, like in a little vial. So I'm going to do that as well. That way I'm really on top of things. I'm guiding the next 3 days. So this is kind of a nice reset to just kind of get totally dialed in for the next few days of guiding here. So, and not every guide guides like me, and that's a good thing. So if you go out with a guide and they don't do it quite like Joe, that's fine. That's no problem. I'm not going to claim to be the best or, the authority on any of this. I just like to, fish a certain way, and I'm most passionate about helping all you folks that maybe aren't going to be with guides. So that's why I like to give you so much information. So right now I'm pre-cutting the strands for the indicators I'm going to build, and then I can put them in. I've got like a little vial. So I'm going to pre-cut about a dozen of these strands, I'm literally cutting them as we speak. And I cut them at about 2.5 inches. And okay, so I got a dozen cut them about 2.5 inches, and then I'll make my indicator and then I'll retrim them down to my desired length once I've got the indicator built. So then I can build the indicator, and then based on the fly size I'm using, I can trim that yarn down to essentially a custom length. So I got a vial full of orange, a vial full of white, and that'll do it tomorrow. I'll fish white as long as the light's not too flat, and then I'll switch over to orange if folks are having trouble seeing that indicator. So yeah, and then kind of last tip, reiterate, stuff we've talked about in the past is, water's low and clear. Don't play it like a rugby game. Think about it a little bit more like a chess match where every move you make could either, benefit you or damage you. Being noisy and etc., certainly have a negative impact on the outcome of your fishery. So if you're wade fishing, be thinking, stealth. You don't need to belly crawl up to every little location, but think your cast through, think them through wisely. And we've got to do that in the boats, as well as you do on foot, because we don't want to blow the spot up, right before a trophy trout finally accepts our offering. So, and lighter and smaller is always stealthier. So anyway, I think I'm going to wrap up with that. We'll just make it kind of a short Tuesday Tippets podcast here today. Yeah, I don't really have any other concluders for you. I just wish you guys all the best of luck out there. I hope you have a super good fall fishing season. Like I said, go check out that YouTube video if you're not following us there. And then there's a more abbreviated version on the Reds Instagram page as well.